Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, January 20th. Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th U.S. president today at noon Eastern Time. He overcame impeachments, criminal charges, and a pair of assassination attempts to win a second term in the White House. U.S. President Joe Biden, as well as former Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, were in attendance for the indoor ceremony at the Capitol Rotunda. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not attend, but Industry Minister Francois Philippe Champagne and Trade Minister Mary Ng were there in Washington. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith watched from an event at the Canadian Embassy. President Joe Biden has pardoned Dr. Anthony Fauci, retired General Mark Milley, and members of the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Mr. Biden used the extraordinary powers of his office in his final hours to guard against potential revenge by the incoming Trump administration. Mr. Biden's decision comes after Donald Trump warned of an enemies list filled with those who have crossed him politically or sought to hold him accountable for his attempt to overturn his 2020 election loss. The first 3 hostages released from Gaza have arrived in Israel for tear-felt reunions with families hours after the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas began on Sunday. The pause in the fighting follows 15 months of war. Footage from Israel shows 3 hostages in a tense handover to the Red Cross on a Gaza City street. They were surrounded by a crowd of thousands of Hamas fighters, all masked and armed men wearing green Hamas headbands. Commentator Isabella Hazan joins us for more on the release.
It's a very intense day in Israel, a very emotional day in Israel, and for the Jewish community, seeing our hostages, Emily, Doron, and Romy, come back home. They're so young. These women have been through so much, and we can just see it on their face. Everyone is so happy to see them, yet the emotion is still very intense because of the 1,900 Palestinian terrorists that are being released for them. We're all happy to have them come back home, yet there's a question of the ceasefire, and there's so much involved. Hopefully this deal goes through properly within the upcoming weeks, so we can have our people back home. And seeing the images from the Red Cross surrounded by Hamas terrorists, and we see these young women coming out, it has brought back a lot of memories for us as Jews. And we know that the Red Cross had released propaganda report to 1943. They turned a blind eye to the Jewish community then, and today they're turning a blind eye to the Jews and Israelis, and they haven't visited the hostages once.
And over 7 hours after the first 3 hostages were released, the first Palestinian prisoners were freed from Israeli custody. Palestinians across the devastated territory began making their way home on Sunday, and hundreds of trucks with humanitarian aid began to enter the territory. The next release of hostages and prisoners is due on Saturday, with 33 hostages and nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees to be freed over the ceasefire's 42-day first phase. Mihail Kotler-Wunsch, Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, joined us to explain exactly who the released prisoners are.
Yeah, so we have to be very, very clear. The 90 people released and set to be released, all of whom basically were either tried for attempted murder of Israelis, some of whom failed in their attempt, so they only stabbed but were unsuccessful at murdering the Israelis that they set to murder. And in that sense, what we are seeing, and these are sort of, by the way, the lighter, if you will, criminals, war criminals that will be released in stages. And we should mention that many of them were released to Judea and Samaria and to Jerusalem, so that they are now walking freely with full intent, actually self-declared by themselves, to continue pursuing the terror for which actually the Palestinian Authority, as you may or may not know, pays to slay Jews. And you are remunerated by the success, if you will, and the number of Jews that you are then sort of successful at murdering. And so, yes, we now have 90 more potential Jew murderers in what I would regard as an extortion of a genocidal terror organization that Hamas is designated as such, including in Canada and most countries around the world, in a situation in which we saw, and the majority of the world, or any of us who actually, cherish life and liberty, could not but shed a tear in the release of 3 women literally stolen from their beds by this genocidal terror organization. And in return, if you will, was the release extorted from Israel of the first sort of group of 90 individuals that we just mentioned, all of whom sat in Israeli prisons for crimes.
All right, stay with us. Up next, we'll have our correspondent Wyatt Sharp, who was at the White House today for Donald Trump's inauguration. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Almost immediately after being sworn in as the 47th president of the United States, all eyes were on Donald Trump's executive orders, including the prospect of 25% tariffs on imports from Canada.
I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before.
Right after the inauguration, our contributor Wyatt Sharp joined us from Washington for more on those announcements.
Yeah, well, we're expecting that there could be close to 200 executive orders on everything ranging from the border immigration and the fentanyl pouring in to the United States to Donald Trump's idea of changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. We are learning, though, that the tariffs might not be one of the executive orders that Donald Trump decides to draft, at least on day one. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be a priority for him, but that 25% tariff threat isn't something that we're looking at in the distant future. But then on the other side, when we're looking at immigration, Donald Trump, of course, has previously said that he will do whatever it takes and spend however much money is needed in order to fulfill his mass deportation efforts. So certainly those are all things that we're going to be watching for.
We also discussed the reaction to Canada avoiding tariffs, at least for now.
Yeah, I certainly think that even the generalized consensus from a lot of Republicans that I've been speaking to, even pro-Trump MAGA Republicans who are in Congress and other bodies, are generally quite happy about this because they recognize that Canada could impose a retaliatory tariff list. And, the United States buying a lot of products like grain, minerals, and of course, oil as one of the big ones from Canada. Some of these retaliatory tariffs that Canadian officials, like the Foreign Affairs Minister, was talking about would have proved to be quite damaging to a lot of American businesses and American officials as well. And so I think certainly right now it is a generalized kind of idea that people here are happy about the fact that these tariffs are not going to be implemented. Even those closest to Donald Trump said there was a chance, rather, going into it that he wasn't going to end up implementing the tariffs because he would come to a consensus that they would be just as damaging to the United States as American tariffs on Canada would be.
And in D.C., lots of discussions were being held, not only about the choice to move the inauguration indoors, but also who was seated up front while Mr. Trump was sworn in. From some of the biggest names in the tech world, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg, to big names on social media.
Generally speaking, a lot of people were looking at who was attending the inauguration. Everyone from, like you said, billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, to YouTube influencers like Patrick Bet-David, Jake Paul, his brother Logan Paul. And then if we're looking at Washington itself and kind of how it's been shaping up, of course, the inauguration got changed, upended really last minute on Friday as it got moved to an indoor ceremony. And then, of course, a lot of people are speculating. I mean, it's cold in Washington, but it's not necessarily that cold to postpone something like an inauguration that millions of dollars would be poured into and a lot of effort would have been poured into. And so there was a consensus here, I think, among a lot of people that people were kind of speculating. Maybe it was a security concern. Maybe it was Donald Trump's kind of concerns around crowd sizes, although the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, who is the incoming White House press secretary, said that all of those are completely unsubstantiated claims, and it was totally to do with some of the frigid temperatures that we're seeing here in D.C.
And while Mr. Trump's threat of tariffs didn't happen today, a new Bank of Canada survey shows that nearly a quarter of Canadian businesses expect their costs to rise with Donald Trump taking office. The central bank polled more than 900 business leaders last month. The survey indicated 18% of those businesses expect their prices to rise with the new U.S. administration, while 11% expect their prices to be lowered. Overall, 40% of companies expect a negative impact on their business. All right, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, we'll be joined by Andrew Donaldson, editor at OrdinaryTimes.com. He and I will be discussing the recent Supreme Court decision in the U.S. to put a federal ban on social media app TikTok until the Chinese-based parent company who owns the app sells the platform to an approved buyer. Since then, Donald Trump has announced a plan to pause the ban, which has potentially created a rift among Republican lawmakers in D.C. After that, we'll have more on the liberal leadership race, so stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. TikTok restored service to users in the United States just hours after the popular video sharing platform went dark in response to a federal ban. The announcement on X came after Donald Trump said on Sunday that he planned to pause the ban by executive order. Mr. Trump says that the order would give TikTok's China-based parent company more time to find an approved buyer. Millions of U.S. TikTok users were unable to access the app and platform starting late Saturday. But by Sunday afternoon, a message greeted those who signed in, thanking them and President-elect for their support. Joining me now is Andrew Donaldson, editor at OrdinaryTimes.com, to discuss the ban and the future of the social media platform. Andrew, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Now, Mr. Trump was initially in favor of the ban, and then he kind of reverse uno'd a little bit and is now planning to make an extension for the deal to be made. What do you make of this reversal?
Well, it's not just Trump. You would need a very large flow chart with a lot of tabs and colors to get all the U.S. politicians that are moving back and forth on this one. What we're seeing here is very much a lobbying effort that we have seen from the TikTok folks. The CEO of TikTok has been at Mar-a-Lago meeting with Trump since the election. We have seen this move from Trump himself being against TikTok and for the ban to moving to push this. And now we have this little bit of political theater where TikTok took down their service and put it back up and credited Trump. This is all very much a lobbying effort and a supreme lesson in political gamesmanship on how to get what you want done. And it's been very effective. This did not just happen overnight. This was very much planned. Somebody got in Trump's ear. Trump has changed position. And a lot of people supporting Trump, especially here in the first day of his presidency, are going to follow suit.
And Republican lawmakers like Senator Tom Cotton and even Mike Johnson has said that the expectation is that the law will still be enforced. Now, would you say this happening is showing that there's a bit of a rift in the Republican Party?
There's not yet, but there could be. Now, this is the early days of the administration, so they're going to try to keep this under wraps. But China is one of those issues where there are people that are going to have some very strong principles that even though they're very Trumpian, even though they support Donald Trump, even though they're very much in the MAGA agenda and been supporters, China's a red line for a lot of people. So as the administration goes on, remember, Donald Trump is still a lame duck president. He'll ride high on the early days of administration, but this is something like China does have the potential to break some people off, especially U.S. senators that are going to be U.S. senators after Donald Trump leaves office. That potential is there, and how they handle this is very important because, again, the national security aspects of this and that, they really believe that. So while Trump will see this as a reciprocal business deal to try to get American interests involved, they probably mean it, and it could become a rift if it's not handled very carefully.
Now, I don't think a lot of people actually understand why the app is being banned. So would you mind walking us through why Congress passed this law to force TikTok to sell?
Well, it's very political, obviously, like we talked about. But this started actually with Donald Trump coming out against TikTok. This all goes to China and the geopolitics of that. China controlling TikTok, and of course, the impression that they do and that the algorithm is somehow controlled in China itself, although the company says they don't. Nobody really believes them. That's the politics behind this. So Congress went and passed a law, and the Supreme Court back at the end of last week upheld that law, saying, yes, they have to either divest or sell it and not basically, at least ostensibly, be under the control of the Chinese communist government, which Americans think is a dictatorship and acts like a dictatorship. And of course, there's the privacy data, and there's the fact that TikTok's not even allowed in China, so it comes across as something that can be very malicious if they're not really careful about it. So that's what got us to this point. It was gone through Congress, it has been ruled as a law, and now we're going to have the negotiation, and Donald Trump sees himself as the supreme negotiator about trying to get American interests to take charge of this thing. Otherwise, they're going to ban it. This is a leverage play, and they use the law and they use the government to do it.
Now, with the negotiation happening, is there a chance that TikTok won't be forced to sell and can stay in the U.S.? And if that does happen, what does that mean for national security?
Well, TikTok is going to exist. We know that now. they've already basically said you had Trump pitching this 50% rule, which I don't think the Chinese interests are going to go for that. But that already kind of tips the hand of, and it kind of comes across as nice app you got there. Be ashamed something happened to it, but it'll be less of a national security threat and less of a free speech threat if we get our cut. That's how it comes across. So there's going to be a negotiation here. There's going to be an effort. We saw at the inauguration all of those tech titans sitting there. Plenty of them would like to get their hands on this. Remember, this is a huge audience. It's a audience that's the hardest to get a hold of politically, very young people, and it's a lot of money involved. So American interests are want to get a hold of that. Donald Trump is adherent to that. He has been told that that helps him with young people, and he probably believes that. I think you're going to see it. So this is going to be one of those things where you get through the noise by following the money. Whoever buys this thing, and if the government blesses them buying it, which they're going to have to get around the law, that's where you're going to find the truth of who's really controlling this and who's seeing it. Follow the money. It's going to get you to the truth of all the noise underneath the national security and free speech and all that that we're being told about.
Andrew, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
The official launch of Chrystia Freeland's bid for the Liberal leadership was interrupted by hecklers on Sunday in Toronto.
For our great and amazing, beautiful country, our country that needs us to be united, that needs every single person and every single supporter across the country. Important, and we are a free country. We're a free country, and one of the great things about our country is that people are free to express dissenting points of view. But what is not okay is to get in the way of others expressing their point of view and putting forward their position.
The former Deputy Prime Minister says that she'll seek re-election as a Liberal MP regardless of whether she wins party leadership, noting that all other contenders should make the same pledge. Her speech was interrupted several times by protesters with at least one banner and a flag related to the Gaza Strip. Government House Leader Karina Gold has officially thrown her hat into the ring for the Liberal Party's top job.
Canadians have lost faith in our party, and we have to earn back their trust. We need to rebuild our party so that we can keep building our country. We need new leadership to fight for everyday Canadians. A leader who understands what people are going through and works every day to make their lives better. A leader with a track record of standing up to bullies, and a leader who won't back down. I'm Karina Gould, and I'm running to be your next leader of the Liberal Party of Canada.
Ms. Gold launched her campaign in her hometown of Burlington, Ontario, positioning herself as the best candidate to restore trust in the Liberal Party.
I'm a middle-class kid from Burlington. I grew up here with a mom who was a local veterinarian and a dad who fought for farmers. They taught me the value of hard work, of tenacity, and always fighting for what matters and standing up for Canadian values. It is such a privilege to be the representative of Burlington. It is such a privilege to get to take your voices to Ottawa. And I'm here today to say that I want to take the voices of all Canadians to Ottawa.
A major endorsement was made Sunday from Quebec in the race for the Liberal leadership. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has endorsed former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney for the job, noting that his unparalleled economic experience makes him someone who can defeat Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. A judge has agreed to expedite a legal challenge of Justin Trudeau's proroguing Parliament. The ruling notes that the court's usual rules on timelines will not apply and a hearing will take place in mid-February. The application filed by 2 Nova Scotia residents is seeking an order to set aside Mr. Trudeau's decision to advise Governor General Mary Simon to exercise her power to prorogue Parliament until March 24th. It also requests a declaration that this session of Parliament has not been prorogued. Dozens of people across 5 provinces have fallen ill due to a salmonella outbreak linked to some recalled mini pastries. The Public Health Agency of Canada says that the Sweet Cream brand mini pastry product has been distributed at bakeries, hotels, restaurants, cafeterias, hospitals, and retirement residences. 61 cases of illnesses have been confirmed, and 17 people have been hospitalized. New Brunswick's Liberal government has reopened an investigation into a mystery brain disease that's mostly affecting people in the Acadian Peninsula and Moncton areas. The number of people affected by what the province calls a neurological syndrome of unknown cause has grown from fewer than 50 in 2020 to about 400 now. Patients have reported such symptoms as memory problems, balance issues, behavioral changes, and bursts of intense pain. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. Good night, Canada.